Take this vitality balloon.
Hey everybody, it's been a while. I have decided to build a solo Aurabot, the Mark Roberts approved playstyle. Um, I am normally a big fan of Aurabots, and I like this build a lot. There are a lot of issues with it. It's somewhat clunky at some points, but largely I think it's pretty good. I'm going to briefly explain the gear. I'll do a map showcase, and then I will show a clip of just doing a Shaper phase, mostly because it's really hard to gauge the DPS of Mercs. I personally don't know where to start with importing Mercenary DPS into a POB, how to calculate that, because there's a lot of hidden modifiers with Mercenaries. For example, they have like 4 times the effect of charges on them, like enemies do and like minions used to. So power charges grant, for example, 200% increased critical strike chance instead of 50. Additionally, there's no passive tree with them, and you have to basically work with like a party tab and setting up a lot of conditional things in the POB. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into that you can't really quite accurately predict. But what you can do is you can fight a boss that you know approximately how much life they have. Like Shaper has, I think, about 750 million. So a Shaper phase being about half of his life is going to be about 37 million damage. So if you can do that in about 1 second, you're going to be at about 37 million DPS. And that's just kind of how I've been roughly estimating the DPS of this Mercenary. So I'm going to start with the actual character here. The reason I picked Scion is mostly because I just had one leveled from group play. Scion is generally the preferred Aurabot Ascendancy because, like for example, you can play Aurabot on a Necromancer and you can benefit from the attack and cast speed. And there's like Plaguebringer, Essence Glutton, and Commander of Darkness that provide some other benefits. And Necromancer is the Ascendancy you pick if you want the most amount of damage provided to the party. And then Guardian is generally your best day one. You have the free reservation efficiency, the free auras, and you have the defense from Radiant Faith. And then Champion is just the best one for hardcore. If you want to be as tanky as possible with the new Fortified node, you get the most amount of aura effect, and you get an absurd amount of defense if you can stack, generally like 30 to 35 fortification stacks without too much trouble as an Aurabot. It should be where you're at. And Scion is supposed to be like the balance of each one. Unfortunately, they nerfed the Guardian Ascendancy node. We don't have the doubled recovery, so that's a really big deal. I'm not really sure what else to run, though. I mean, the reservation efficiency is actually kind of holding my build together currently. So, but this is typically what your like duo Aurabot tree looks like. Sometimes you'll go out to here instead of anointing it. I think anointing charisma is probably better once you have a Steel Mage Wormhole Jewel here, Impossible Escape. Mostly because this is, I think this is the best Impossible Escape for Aurabots. You can pick up the reservation here, and you can pick up a full wheel of Suppress, or even just the notable. Generally, you'll path through like 4 cluster jewels, which you have easy access to right here, 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 and here. You don't really need voices. It makes it a little bit more point efficient, but you can still fit in 4 jewels instead of the 5 that I have. And then you'll have some spots for a Timeless Jewel here or here. Here's an okay spot too, but generally you don't want to override Energy Shield if you don't have to, and you don't want to run into a situation where your block chance isn't capped because you're unable to take glancing blows. I mean, this Thread of Hope essentially saves you 2 passive points, which is a big deal on an Aurabot, because you'd have to, like, you could put the points in the jewel here, but then you'd still have these 2 points that you're saving. All right. Past that, gear is pretty simple. It's just generally stuff you can find on an Aurabot. Darkseer is probably not the like endgame scepter, but it's gonna be pretty close. It's just +2, which I'll get to later why that's huge. and then the energy shield and the mana. The mana here is also kind of holding my reservation together as well. Hand of Frisia is, I think it's generally accepted as the, like, basically the best in slot duo and trio Aurabot gloves. These can't really be used in larger parties easily because every single ally has to be linked or else they're dead because they don't have your auras if you're using Hand of Frisia. The reason they're best in slot, though, is not necessarily directly due to the aura effect. It's mostly due to the fact that the aura effect that you get from the gloves is so high that you can drop aura effect from a shield or maybe one other source as well and get a lot more defense. So for example, Aegis Aurora or Svalin is what you can replace a Matua or a rare 10% aura effect shield with to get a lot of defense. And that's super important as a duo Aurabot or in this case, a solo Aurabot, because the content that you generally put an Aurabot up against is really difficult if an Aurabot is the only support. The Aurabot is generally very squishy against that content. And Aegis Aurora does a shit ton to help that. That's why we path all the way down to Iron Reflexes. It's just to pick up all of that armor. Now there's two ways you can path through here. You can come all the way through here and pick up a bunch of armor tattoos, or you can come through here and pick up Suppress. I think the armor tattoos are generally going to be better because you'll recover through more. It's essentially double dips as a mitigation layer with the Aegis and with the fact that it's armor, so it mitigates physical damage. Although the Suppress is still a great way to go, you would probably just actually allocate Charisma instead of anointing it. You should still be able to reach like 80% Suppress once I free up some points to click the Suppression Mastery here, and then you get a Watcher's Eye and a Quartz Flask with Suppress, and then you'd have to find like one other source of Suppress, and you'd basically be at 80 to 90% Suppress, which makes your character extremely tanky when you consider having 120,000 armor, 90 res when you're linked, and so on and so forth. So that's the Aurabot character itself. It's basically a pretty typical like duo trio Aurabot. The main thing that the damage comes from is the Mercenary. So basically, this gear on the Mercenary is absolutely garbage. There's some pieces that are really good. I mean, you don't have to have a Headhunter. It's just something for some flair that I've added in because it's funny. I'm going to very quickly explain some of the problems with using a Mercenary as a carry. Aside from the AI issues, basically, you don't have a tree as with the Mercenary, so you can't really scale this huge increased damage multiplier. On a lot of endgame builds, you try and get to like a minimum of 600% increased damage, maybe get all the way to like 800, 900, and that's when it stops being worth it to scale a lot of increased damage. Armor stackers are obviously an exception, but generally that's the rule. You don't have a tree to scale at least 500 of that increased damage, so you have to get it from gear. And so KB of clustering, as far as I'm aware, the Mercenary should have this applied to it too. It gets 200% increased effective spell damage that gets applied to this specific attack. So that's why we've got a wand with 120% spell damage. You can basically get like 150 if you get the right hybrid mod. But this is just kind of what I was able to find. So it's not a particularly great wand. You could probably use the Piscator's wand as like a 1C solution. It's got increased damage, it's got attack speed, it's got most of what you'd want for 1 chaos. Then we're basically using this Calandra ring for fire res and for elemental damage with attacks. That's pretty much it. That's the increased damage right now. You can probably get a shield with 100% spell damage on it too, but this only has 50 because it's the unique, and the AoE is pretty awesome when you're clearing. It doesn't really do anything for bosses, obviously. Next thing are boots. These aren't usually that difficult to craft. I ended up buying these though just because I didn't want to have to spend the time crafting them. One issue with mercs is that they walk pretty slowly, so trying to do anything to give them some type of speed is very important, I think, anyway. We have gloves for just... I don't really know what to do with the gloves. I was thinking of using the rage regen gloves, but I'm not really sure mercenaries can get rage or not, so I haven't seen like the little rage effect that is drawn around characters that have rage on the mercenary, so maybe that's a graphical bug, or maybe they just can't get rage. But the last couple pieces are very important. I mentioned earlier that charges apply at the same values that they do to monsters, which means that power charges give 200% increased critical strike chance, and frenzy charges give 16% attack and cast speed. So having a chest like this that gives you both is insanely powerful. This is just like a really simple woke orb craft I made just to get it going. I happened to get lucky with the fire res. I haven't really finished the craft, but you get both from just one piece of gear, and with the hit rate of this character, even those 15 and 10% values are going to be always on. The last two pieces of gear, or last three rather, are the really big solutions to problems that mercenaries have. One of them is going to be, how do you get critical strike multiplier? Because that's, again, one of the things that you'll get a lot of from your tree. Usually you'll get like 150% from a tree, which is a pretty big deal. This is why we've gone with Marieline's fallacy. With the 5 endurance charges, not 6, the 5 endurance charges, with the 5 power charges I have on this character, this merc should be floating around 65% critical strike chance, despite having this 48% less crit chance multiplier on it, which is insane. And Marieline's might just be best in slot for this mercenary because it's 300 critical strike multiplier from one piece of gear, as well as calling strike. I have no idea what could possibly be better than that on a mercenary. So the last problem is, how do you solve resistance? Every single build in the game that does not have a method to ignore resistance on enemies has to find a way to either lower it or penetrate it. And usually you need at least 25% pen for your build to be considered endgame viable. That's mostly because if you run into an enemy that has 75% res, you're dealing a fourth of your damage on them. Having 25% pen will double your damage on that enemy with 75 res, and an enemy with no res just takes 25% more damage. Fortunately, this patch, they introduced probably the 4th item in the game that's on par with Mageblood, Headhunter, and Original Sin. This item is so good that most cold hit builds will be trying to convert their damage to fire and use a heat shiver specifically because of this ring. Once you get enough fire resist, this ring is worth 3 times the damage, and it is a complete solution to any resistance problem you may have. You get this ring, and you get 290 fire res. Well, 290 if you're at 90 fire res cap. And you'll just, like, you won't even notice any enemy res. Like, I don't know what they were thinking when they added this. If this were a tier 0, it'd probably cost about as much as Headhunter. The last item is just part of the crit stuff. It's just power charge and critical strike multiplier and fire res for the ring. My merc is only getting, I think, about 120% pen from this ring. There's not really many ways I can think of to squeeze out more fire res. I mean, obviously there's some you could do on the boots. You can get higher values here, and you might be able to run a rare shield that gets you, 40 to 60 fire res. But apart from that, I don't know. I just might call 130, 140% about the best I can do. Now the skills that you run as the actual Aurabot here are kind of up for debate. For example, Anger is just another way of getting extra fire damage, but you could run Wrath because maybe you want Shock. Problem is, I don't know if you'll deal enough lightning damage with Wrath for it to matter. But basically, we are providing all of the flat damage to the carry. The only source of flat that the Mercenary has is the Fizz from the weapon and the extremely shitty 8 to 16 fire on the weapon. Everything else comes from 3 places. Number 1 is Anger, and number 2 is Flame Link. These are the 2 that you can have up all the time. Your Mercenary must be linked at all times, or they won't have any damage. But the last one is really kind of insane, and it's Pyroclast Mines. Pyroclast Mines add so much flat damage at the top end that it's easily at least 5 times the combined damage of Anger and Flame Link. This is roughly an average of like 3.7, 3.8 thousand fire damage. And when you throw 10 of these, you will instantly feel that damage. For example, if I go into a tier 16 map, just to show you, where's like a not garbage layout. No regen. It's recovery, flask. Okay, cool. I'll go in and show without linking, just so you can see the damage of the Mercenary without linking, because they won't have any buffs at that point. You'll basically just be playing a dead character. So once I start throwing some mines, you will instantly tell the damage difference. That's without any link, but with the mines out. So here's mines. No link and just mines. And here's without either of them. So once you get a link going, though, you can pretty much just shield charge through a map. It's kind of like Righteous Fire, only slightly clunkier. And if you get too far away from the Merc, it'll just automatically teleport to you. So here's without any mines. Oh, I killed him anyway. And that was, at the end, I threw some mines. The mines are really what makes it bossing viable. Without them, you're kind of dealing maybe like 5 to 10 million Shaper DPS. With the mines, you can break 50 million with this setup. So that's kind of a brief overview. I'm gonna try and refine this a little bit more over the coming weeks, and to see how far I can push it. It should be uber viable. I don't particularly like making characters that die to Ubers, so I'll have to figure out how to make it basically able to almost AFK the Ubers at the same time, which may or may not be a problem with a Mercenary, because Mercenaries may die in Ubers, they may not. They have an insane layer of damage reduction that, I mean, it was so intense that in really juiced maps with a party, I didn't even once see the Merc take damage on its health bar. So they may survive in Ubers, they may not. Who knows? But if you have any questions or you want to look at the POB, feel free to leave a comment. I'll leave this character import link into the in the description. It's not fully fleshed out, so you can feel free to judge and critique my build. Basically, just moved over my Aurabot to this setup like 5 hours ago and started playing it, and it felt great. So, anyway, thanks for watching.